sometimes I think about like what could exist in my brain that is just like instead filled with YouTube bullshit. That's just like some shit that's just, it's never going to leave your head. And there's this like video diary like thing that's on YouTube that was the actor Ernest Borgnine and his like in his like bus. He had like a RV or something. Then he would just like ride across America, and he was outside of Des Moines, and there's a town outside of Des Moines called Altoona, Iowa. And he was just like, "Oh, we're in Altoona, Iowa, not Pennsylvania." And that one line has just been going through my head for like the last week and a half.
I like
and I need help.
That for you, and it totally makes sense that like out of all of the oddities that exist on YouTube, your point of reference is Ernest Borgnine.
Yes. Yes.
I'm already looking it up. He had what?
Oh, buddy.
Was this like a series of videos that he had or something?
Yeah, it's something like he's like, we just finished this spaghetti dinner, and we're going now to the Dairy Queen to go get an ice cream.
Oh, I'll be damned. There he is.
Yeah, I mean, looking not super healthy, but he was up there in the years.
Yeah.
This is probably
should not have been driving at this point at all. Much less in a bus across the country.
And he's like, there's like videos because he was probably at the time. What was he was like on the Love Boat and shit.
He was in wasn't he in the was he in the Poseidon Adventure or the Towering Inferno? Which one was he in? Or was he in both?
The Towering Inferno. Yeah. Shane is completely dissociating.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. I'm just happy to be back.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off his death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane. Was that the George Lucas?
That's of course. The thing. Yeah.
And we've got,
I missed it.
You've got Chris.
Howdy.
I love that so much. That clip fucking plays in my head more than I care to admit.
One of these days we'll do an episode on George Lucas, and it'll just be that clip going on for like an hour and a half as we laugh over it.
Can we just throw it in just for good measure, please?
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for doing this. I love it. Okay. Anyway, so today this is again something that we had been really interested in. An individual we've been really interested in talking about since the inception of this show, and finally this is the week that we are able to get around to it. That I just again knowing him tangentially and like not really delving into the shit. It's I knew that he was like a weird character and all that stuff, and as again, as you heard my voice last week in the intro on Carvana, it's just one of those things. Fuck, I wasn't disappointed, and I am now again pulled into the dirt as we are with Peter Thiel. How would you even describe him? Like tech billionaire,
vampire.
Yeah.
like cartoonishly evil, comically evil.
Victor
in a way
Von Doom.
Yeah, more rich people should be. It just makes it easier.
Yeah.
So we've got a few kind of like sections to talk about with him, and we're going to start off. Let me just give you a brief overview of his upbringing, which was kind of odd in my opinion, but he's German. He was born in Germany, West Germany, then in '67, and he spent his life basically following his father's career as a chemical engineer, kind of bouncing around the globe, most notably going to America firstly, and then going to South Africa. Now,
where everybody has to make a stop.
You gotta. And interesting to me too. At the time, it was called Southwest Africa, which is now modern day Namibia. If anybody is interested in African colonialism and specifically German African colonialism and their their involvement in that area of Africa in Namibia, I recommend looking into it because a lot can be argued for, like, you know, the fascistic behavior that they did in the early part of the 1900s that then kind of translated. You know, this is like bringing the fascism into the metropole. I'm not an expert in it, but from the limited amount of information that I know about it, it's quite fucking sick. Not saying anything about that for Peter Thiel. Obviously, he was born much farther after that, but interesting with the German presence.
Nothing untoward going on in South Africa during the time his family was there.
No. I wouldn't see a problem. This is the 60s, 70s. It's all good. But there was this like weird story again, with all these like billionaires. There's these like kind of polished. Shane, are you okay?
I'm sorry. It's just what popped into my head after all of that. It's just like the reason he goes there is to visit like some like older family members who are like in the Luftwaffe and now are like hiding out around the globe. I'm sorry.
Hey, listen, man. I didn't go that far back in his lineage.
Did you bring the serum? The serum of life. Sorry, please.
So he says like he went to school in Swakopmund, and they were I guess they were doing like hitting their hands, like corporal punishment, like physical punishment in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And it said that like he was like, oh, this was a thing that really sparked my imagination, and I thought like, we need to rebuff against these kind of like cookie cutter morals, and we need to express ourselves individually, and that's why I'm a fucking libertarian. It's all just manufactured bullshit to support his current worldview and his current ideology. But he ended up going out of Africa and back to America and settled in, let's call it, the Bay Area. He went to San Mateo High School, and he ended up going to Stanford. And I would like to turn it over to you, Chris, because a weird kind of like interim thing, a little bit of newsworthy business came out of his experience in Stanford, which I'd love for you to touch on before we moved on.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this really kind of, a lot of this really kind of sets the tone for, really to get a good idea of like him as a person and his ideology. There's a guy named Max Chafkin that published a book recently that's like a biography of Thiel, and he's written like this like kind of actually was just published like a week and a half ago, like a rather lengthy article about his like origins and like him as a kid and him at Stanford. This was in the New York Intelligencer, and I mean kind of like the picture they paint of this kid is like this very deeply weird, very unliked by other people who knew him. He was in the chess club, and they tell this one particular anecdote about him with like other chess club members going down to like a tournament in Santa Cruz, and nobody likes him, and like Thiel is the one driving, and they're saying that he's driving like fucking like 90 miles an hour down like Route 17 or something, and he gets pulled over, and he like says to the cop like something like like, well, I'm not really sure that the concept of a speed limit makes sense. I think it's unconstitutional. And
cops love that, by the way. They love when you question that. Apparently
they let him go without a ticket. Apparently, but like a lot of this like. So yeah, his time at Stanford, he was sort of very unliked by most people. Which kind of like sort of, led him to be sort of isolated and sort of hated everybody and sort of hated everybody that hated everything that he was seeing at Stanford, because he was very obviously, from that anecdote, it was already obviously very like libertarian, very right wing. And during the time that he was at Stanford in the late 80s and the early 90s was like right in the middle of the first, we're in the second one now, but like the first right wing hysteria over like what we would now call cancel culture and like critical race theory and stuff. Like at the time it was political correctness and multiculturalism and
kind of reminds me of Bill Regnery when he was in college. William Regnery II. Remember we were talking about that, where he's like sequestered off, nobody really likes him, he's a weird kind of like social misfit, and then everybody and he's like, he doesn't know how to square that, and so he just calcifies into these fascistic beliefs. But all right.
Right. Like a lot of this like conversation, a lot of this debate about this like political correctness type stuff like actually started at Stanford during the time he was there. One thing in particular that I've seen stuff about was a student group, like a coalition of student groups kind of inspired by Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. They called, they had like a set of demands or whatever, like a set of requests for the administration of the college that they called the Rainbow Agenda. And, one of the things that they were asking for was, more consideration for, non-white perspectives in history classes, specifically in Stanford's required Western culture course. And one of the things that they accomplished was kind of changing that course to not specifically focus on Western culture or like, the great achievements of great white men or whatever. And they changed the name of the course to Cultures, Ideas, and Values. And as a direct reaction to this, Peter Thiel actually he co-founded the Stanford Review in 1987, which is Stanford's right-wing student newspaper. Like this is at the same time kind of also that like there's several of these like right-wing student newspapers that all kind of have the same name. There's the Dartmouth Review. That's where Laura Ingraham and Dinesh D'Souza were at, and Ann Coulter was at the which one was she at? Was she at Cornell? Was she at the Cornell Review? I can't remember which one she was at. But they're all basically like kind of like a ripoff of the National Review. They're all the something review. And so Peter Thiel starts the one at Stanford, and this was like their mainstay. This like culture war shit about like the Marxists in the academy are gonna replace like Shakespeare with the color purple and stuff like that. And they had an article that was in that student paper about like hyperventilating about just adding Zora Neale Hurston to the Western culture chorus and like how that's an attack on Western civilization and stuff like that. And then just a little bit I want to read from this Max Chafkin article that I was talking about, and this goes into a little bit more detail about the paper, what he was getting into there. It says a fundraising letter sent to older alumni warned that a professor was teaching a course on black hairstyles. It led to a flood of donations. These sort of antics helped draw the attention of Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education, who came to speak at a review event and made national news recapping it on PBS's McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. Thiel's newspaper was also fixated on sex. The first issue featured a satirical column, Confessions of a Sexual Deviant, about a young straight man who'd chosen to be celibate. According to the review, it was almost impossible to visit a men's restroom without witnessing a gay sex act or to cross the quad without having fistfuls of free condoms pressed into your hand. In 1987, presenting homosexuality as an addiction, a columnist wrote that, quote, unnatural gay men had yielded to temptation so many times that the fires of lust burned within them, making it indeed difficult for them to control themselves. There's another anecdote about like a close friend of his named Keith Raboy, who was like another like I don't know, I believe he also was involved in the Stanford Review, but he was like standing outside the home of a like a Stanford employee or something, like yelling like homophobic slurs at the house and like saying that he hopes he dies of AIDS and all this sort of stuff. Jesus, and like you're gonna get what's coming to you, and like this was like Thiel defended this as like a he basically made him like a free speech type, like a free speech martyr, right? Like it was like a free speech type issue. And last thing here, it says 2 days later, this was 2 days after that incident, the Stanford Review published, quote, the rape issue, with an impassioned defense of a student who'd pleaded no contest to statutory rape. And this is the kind of like this is the shit that animated him as a young man. It's like important to kind of understand where he's coming from ideologically, and for as much as like also he claims to like be a libertarian or whatever bullshit. This is just like he's a Republican. He's just like
yes,
he's just like a Reagan Republican basically. He started calling himself a libertarian, I think, probably once he got rich because he didn't want to fucking like pay taxes and did like the Koch brothers thing of like funneling a bunch of dark money into groups that are pushing libertarian ideology to like try to launder those ideas and popularize them and shit like that. So basically he's like just a fucking product of this like Reagan era like sort of moral majority type like very culture oriented, like right wing republicanism. He told Glenn Beck in 2014 that it was like the hippies in the 60s who destroyed America. Like he said that like pinnacle of Western civilization, July 1969, moon landing.
Wow.
3 weeks later, Woodstock, all downhill from there. That's where the progress ended. It's been all downhill from there.
Woodstock did it for him. That was
Woodstock did it for him. And like he's come around even kind of nowadays to just admitting that he's a Republican. It's like Trump kind of came along and like sort of made that okay, I guess.
Right.
As soon as Trump came along, he doesn't really even call himself a libertarian anymore. He just calls himself a Republican. And the last thing I wanted to mention here before I'll let you kind of get into his the start of him, founding PayPal and stuff like that. After he graduated from Stanford and before he started PayPal, in 1996, he wrote a book called The Diversity Myth, Multiculturalism and Political Intolerance on Campus, which sounds like it could just like be a Jordan Peterson's new book or something. It's like the exact same shit, the exact same shit. And again, in this book, he like wrote some things about he's very sorry that nowadays he regrets some of the things he's written, and he'd like you to know that he's very sorry for the things he's written.
He's very sorry for the things that he believes.
Yeah, he's very sorry for some of the things he wrote in that book, not for valorizing his friend as a free speech martyr or any of that kind of stuff. But I wanted to read a little bit here from, what was the title of this article? This is from 2016, and it says, Peter Thiel apologizes for what he wrote about rape in his book, The Diversity Myth. And this is reading a small bit from this article here. In The Diversity Myth, Multiculturalism and Political Intolerance on Campus, Thiel and co-author David O. Sachs argued that multiculturalism in colleges was hurting education and that some cases of alleged date rape were actually, quote, seductions that are later regretted. In one section of the book, Thiel and Sachs wrote, and this is in quotes here, but since this I don't even understand what this is supposed to mean, but since a multicultural rape charge may indicate nothing more than a belated regret, a woman might, scare quotes, realize that she had been, scare quotes, raped the next day or even many days later. Under these circumstances, it is unclear who should be held responsible. If the alcohol made both of them do it, then why should the woman's consent be obviated any more than the man's? Why is all blame placed on the man? In his apology 20 years later, Thiel said in a statement, more than 2 decades ago, I co-wrote a book with several insensitive, crudely argued statements. As I've said before, I wish I'd never written those things. I'm sorry for it. Rape in all forms is a crime. I regret writing passages that have been taken to suggest otherwise. Another passage in The Diversity Myth took aim at multiculturalism, with the authors writing that, quote, real diversity requires a diversity of ideas, not simply a bunch of like-minded activists who resemble the bar scene from Star Wars. Oh. And there's a bunch of videos of him on YouTube. He went on C-SPAN a couple times to talk about this book after it was published, and it's just like, it's like Nazi shit, basically. Yeah. It's just like people who support the multiculturalism thing. It's not actually about learning about other cultures or respecting other cultures or inclusivity or anything like that. It's about bringing people in and diluting Western culture. It's not about bringing in other ideas or perspectives or anything like that. It's a concerted effort by Marxists to destroy Western civilization. It's just like Tucker Carlson.
That's correct.
Shit, basically.
It's the same, like you were saying, Chris, it's the same culture war still going on now that is rebranded as like either postmodernism or feminism or critical race theory or whatever. It's the same premise that these are all invasive ideas brought in specifically to like dismantle the sanctity of the Western civilization to make it prime and ready for Bolshevik revolution or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's a bit of what he was getting to in college, a bit of what he was getting into out of college. After he graduated from Stanford Law School, he was kind of going around to a couple different jobs before he really started PayPal, and really that's when he started making his money. So Dwight, I don't know if that's where you'd want to pick it up for now.
I just have to say too. I mean, two things. The first thing is I saw from an SFgate article from 1995 that it's all old friends of ours, that there was a joint like letter put out in response to this into this insane book that was put out Peter Thiel from Stanford University president, a guy named Gerard Casper, and the university provost, Condoleezza Rice.
Yep, there we go.
Love it. And the second thing I wanted to say is just like, put yourself back like to when you were 19 or 20, or if you're listening and you're 19 or 20 now, or even younger than that, and just like imagine that like you're in sunny, Bay Area, California, you're young, you've got your whole life ahead of you. There's people like, hey, Peter, you want to come hang out? Or we're going to go have a couple beers.
And also lots of privilege and lots of money. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Can you fucking imagine? Gee, I was literally thinking of,
even coming from that comfort and wealth, he saw, he had to take a stand.
I was
what he believed in.
Literally thinking about that today. And when I was like, what did I actually spend my money on in college? And I honestly think that like one of my largest expenditures, aside from booze, obviously, was like night crawlers from a farmer to go fishing. Like, I just can't even imagine what it would be like to be like, yes, we're going to go get Shane. City boy Shane, not buying worms.
Night crawlers. I thought you meant like creepy crawlers for a second. No. I was like, yeah, dude, go off.
Oh, God. But just, again, like a 19-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid, whatever, who's
right,
like,
yeah.
You know what I'm going to do with my time and my undergraduate, degree? Again, it's such like
these people need to be taken down a peg or two, and by these people he means rape victims.
It's so insane.
It's such a fucking bizarre, like manufactured grievance, right?
It's so insane.
Yeah,
So, but again, like that speaks to what it's ideologically incoherent, and it's what it really says is just like, nobody likes me on this campus, and I will get my revenge. Everyone's trying to tell me who I am and what I need to think. Well, I'll show them one day.
Especially, I loved the part from the excerpt I read where he's talking about like the horror of like condoms being handed out on campus. Like, I don't even think people even realize nowadays just how big a fucking thing that was in the 80s and 90s. Like, that was one of Rush Limbaugh's main things in all of his books from the 90s and in and on his show. That was like the sex education like type stuff, like this very Jerry Falwell sort of moral majority inspired crusade against teaching people about sex or handing out condoms, of all things.
Yeah.
I guess
of all things,
that's an interesting point of reflection, because like, to stop and think of just like how much like the window shifts of like how we think about things. Like, I even remember
the George W. Bush administration was the high watermark of that.
Just gonna say that. I was just because that's when I went to college, during the Bush years and shit, and it was just, even then it was, anyway. It blows my mind that this guy was just like, hey, instead of studying or instead of doing fucking whatever I could be doing with my time on campus, like it's such a fucking what an idiot.
No.
Anyway, so like you were saying, Chris, post Stanford, he also ended up getting a law degree from Stanford as well, and then like barely using it. He did some clerk for a judge in he did clerk for a judge. He ended up doing some corporate law in New York. But ultimately,
I believe also, if I may, he also applied to be a clerk for both Scalia and Justice Kennedy, but was like turned down by both.
Love it. He was probably like, I'd love to give you guys a copy of one of my books. Like, fuck, get this weirdo out of my office. But ultimately, I mean, again, when we think about where do these billionaires get their money, oftentimes it's through, being first or being in the right place in the right time. And I think in the case of Peter Thiel, that's exactly the case, because he returned to the Bay Area, to San Francisco area in California, and the .com boom was, in its adolescence, I'll say. It wasn't in its nascency, it was in its adolescence. And he was there in the kind of mid to late 1990s. And like any of us can do, he was able to get together $1 million to start his own hedge fund, essentially. It's called Thiel Capital Management. And he wanted to look into opportunities to fucking invest, because that's what you do when you're able to get $1 million from fucking friends and family. And PayPal was one of the biggest boons, maybe, of any kind of like Silicon Valley stories. This is where Elon Musk came from. Another Southern African gem.
There's a great picture of the two of them together. There's that famous.
I'd love to see that.
Oh, here, let me drop it. I found so many of these kinds of things, but hold on. There was like a whole photo shoot. Here's one.
Is it the PayPal Mafia photos?
Yeah. Here's one.
What the fuck is that thing?
It's Thiel.
I never saw the other side of the picture. I just looked at that fucking
and then
sick. This thing looks like
here's them like holding up their like credit cards or whatever.
Elon Musk looks like it's like you know when like conspiracy theorists will like put these pictures on the internet where it was like, what is this creature that washed up on shore? But it's just like it was like a muskrat or whatever, like a mundane animal that just was bleached by the sun and has been body was bloated by just like death and decay and what the fuck is that word? I'm getting off topic. But what the fuck is that? Lysosomes. Isn't that like the part of the cell that like when it dies, it like breaks down the cell or something like that? Anyway.
Yeah, I threw another picture in the Discord. That's a photo shoot. There was like this puff piece that was written about the PayPal Mafia, and they like I guess dressed them all up like really cool guys. They're
like
some
gangsters,
Italian
dressed them up
restaurant
like fucking cousins.
The many saints of Silicon Valley.
Included in this picture, by the way, is that guy Keith Raboy, who was also involved in PayPal, and at least to some extent, his friend from Stanford.
We should make this the episode art. Look, the guy in the back is like that fucking son I am disappoint guy. Jesus Christ. Who thought, like, again, like, how many hands
the
did
guy,
this go through?
I can't see because it's a little compressed, the version you said, but the guy sitting, like, straight in the back looks like Big Pussy Malagna from The Sopranos.
and then there's some weird fucking creature in front. Anyway, these guys are weirdos. And again, Elon Musk, I can't overstate how much shit he looked like in the late 90s. I mean,
if you just, again, if you just look at the picture of the two of them sitting together in, like, I guess in the 90s, right, where they're both, like, leaning on the computer that says PayPal, and to just think for the next, like, 20 years, the fucking evil both of those people would, like, bring to us.
Cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated.
Yeah. I had one...
Go ahead.
Really quick, just because for the picture I grabbed that from is from a Business Insider article. I think it's just like it's like a listicle stupid thing that details like little factoids about their relationships. But the first one is that Musk thinks Thiel is a sociopath, and Thiel considers Musk a fraud, and it's just like both are right.
Oh my god.
They're both entirely right because now they like hate each other or whatever. But anyway,
so. What I want to center this conversation around is a ProPublica article that came out this year in June. It was by Justin Elliott, Patricia Callahan, and James Bandler. And I can't overstate to you enough how much this broke my brain, because what it turns out is that Peter Thiel used a investment vehicle, which when I say it, you'll all know what it is. I mean, probably none of us have it because we don't have like, fucking disposable
money.
Income. Yeah. That's Shane. That's why you're my financial advisor. Anyway, the name of the article was The Lord of the Roths. How tech mogul Peter Thiel turned a retirement account for the middle class into a $5 billion tax-free piggy bank.
He's named, by the way, Thiel is named like 6 of his companies after Lord of the Rings shit.
So,
by the way, Palantir is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Valar.
Are you serious?
Clarion Capital is one of them, yeah.
They're all named after Lord of the Rings.
They're all named after Lord of the Rings shit.
So I'm going to skip down into this pretty deep to cut to the chase, and it's a little bit of a narrative, but I want you to follow us on this because this describes exactly what shouldn't happen, right? A Roth IRA, the idea of it is like, much like a 401k, it's like, hey, this is something discretionary that you can put money into, and you can invest it into something. You can direct its investment and leave that investment. You can't take that money out until a period of time. I believe it's like age 60. Yeah. So you can take it out when you're 60. But the idea is, of course, that, this is something for the middle class. In fact, Senator Roth was like the head of the Senate Finance Committee. This was like a big thing for him, big legislation and shit like that, to say like, hey, this is going to be an investment vehicle for the middle class to save for retirement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it's also like a way to prop up capital markets and stuff like that and put more money into that with the promise of it being tax-free. My humble opinion would say, hey, let's bolster Social Security, but that's just me. You should not have to self-direct, your own retirement and enjoy it. You should just get money at the end of your career. But anyway, I'm going to read from this ProPublica article and we'll understand what went so fucked up here. It says, one day in early 1999, a deputy of Thiel's at the company that would become PayPal walked into the San Francisco office of Pensco Pension Services. It could have been an uneventful appointment. Instead, it changed Thiel's life. Thiel, a Stanford law graduate, ran a small hedge fund and hadn't yet joined the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. But he had an outsized ambitions for his months-old tech venture, where he served as both chairman and CEO. He envisioned his company creating a, quote, new world currency free of all government control. Influenced by libertarian Ayn Rand and Tolkien's fantasy trilogy, Thiel, then in his early 30s, carried himself like a contrarian philosopher king, aka fucking asshole. I mean, again, it's that like, no one wants to be around you, prick. Like, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck. Oh, God, can you imagine? Okay.
Imagine someone self-describing themselves as a contrarian philosopher.
Fucking, again, like these fucking nerds need to be decked early on. Anyway, a few years earlier, he had co-authored I'm dumb. I don't know this. Do you know this word? Jeremiad? Jeremiad? Jeremiad?
I'm not sure I know that word, yeah.
A long, mournful complaint or lamentation, a list of woes. Anyway, stopping my state school ass. He had authored something against multiculturalism that was accused, right, we talked about this, but he said here, and accused the administration of then President Bill Clinton of waging class warfare. Quote, taxing the rich seems to have become an end in itself, he and his co-author wrote. Again, this is the thing that Chris was talking about earlier. Pensco was a small firm that allowed its customers to put nearly any investment they wanted into a tax-advantaged retirement account. Thiel was about to become Pensco's whale. In an interview with ProPublica, Pensco, again, this was like 22 years ago or something like this, the late 90s, 1999. In an interview with ProPublica, Pensco founder Tom Anderson recalled how Thiel and other PayPal executives had wanted to put startup shares of the company into traditional IRAs. But Anderson dangled something sweeter. I said, if you really think this is going to be big, you might want to consider this new Roth, recalled Anderson, who is now retired. If the investment ballooned, he remembered saying, you're not going to pay tax on it when you take it out. It's a no-brainer. The math was compelling. Thiel wouldn't get a tax break up front, but he'd avoid an immense tax bill later if the investment surged in value. They immediately grasped that, Anderson said, and they did it. What happened next deprived the U.S. government of untold millions in tax revenue, perhaps billions. Thiel used his new Roth IRA to purchase shares of the startup. This is where it gets fucking insane to me. Okay, and just to pause and recap, what this is saying is that for minimal investment now, again, venture capital or something like that, if it turns into billions, you will pay $0 in tax when it appreciates. You have to wait, but you will pay $0 in tax. In 1999, single taxpayers were only allowed to contribute to a Roth if they made less than $110,000 per year. Like many startups, PayPal offered its top executives low initial salaries and large stock grants. Thiel's income that year was $73,000, IRS records show, so he was okay to do this. Thiel also had an advantage over most Americans with IRAs, who typically use them to purchase publicly traded stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and CDs. Since Thiel had used his Roth to buy shares of a private company, the value was not set on a public stock exchange. Although the details of such purchases aren't public, Thiel's financial assistant later disclosed them into a letter included in the entrepreneur's application for residency in New Zealand, which we'll talk about later. Mr. Thiel purchased his founder shares in PayPal through his Roth IRA during PayPal's formation. SEC filings describing that time don't mention Thiel's Roth. They show that he bought his first slice of the company in January 1999. He paid 1/10 of a penny per share for 1.7 million shares, meaning that he did his initial investment in PayPal using this Roth IRA for $1,700.
Wow.
$1,700. I want to repeat that. That's $1,700. And he was able to set the price because it was a private company. Thiel's unusual stock purchase risked running afoul rules designed to prevent IRAs from becoming illegal tax shelters. I'll give you a hint, it now is. Investors aren't allowed to buy assets for less than their true value through an IRA. That practice is sometimes known as stuffing because it gets around the strict limits imposed by Congress on how much money can be put in a Roth. PayPal later disclosed details about the early history of the company in an SEC filing before its IPO. The filing reveals that Thiel's founder shares were among those the company sold to employees at, quote, below fair value. I mean, if this to you isn't reading as fucking insanely corrupt, I don't know what to tell you. Victor Fleischer, a tax law professor at the University of California, Irvine, who has written about the valuation of founder shares, read the PayPal filings at ProPublica's request. Buying startup shares at a discounted tenth of a penny price with a Roth, he asserts, would be indefensible. That's a huge scandal, Fleischer said, adding, how greedy can you get? So again, this should have never happened. This straight up should have never been available for him to be able to, skirt this. Now, it's possible that the startup didn't pan out, but who fucking cares? It did. At the time that Thiel bought his founder shares, his own hedge fund had already loaned the new startup $100,000. And soon the company sold him the shares. Millions of dollars poured in from investors, security filing shows. In just a month's time, the company sold a slice of itself to investors for $500,000. That June and August, another $4.5 million poured in from the venture fund arm of a telecom giant Nokia and other investors. The dot-com boom was in full swing. We're definitely onto something big, Thiel told employees in late 1999, predicting that PayPal would become the Microsoft of payments. It's just the same shit now. It's like the Amazon of cars or the fucking Uber of...
Right, yeah.
Oh, God, I just have to read this one part. But then it came time for Pensko, right, this is the custodian of Thiel's Roth, to report the value of the account to the IRS at the close of 1999. None of the investor enthusiasm was apparent. Pensko told the IRS that Thiel's Roth was worth just $1,664 at the end of 1999. That, to me, seems crooked as fuck. Crooked as fuck. After 1999, Thiel would never again contribute money to his Roth. He didn't need to. In just a year's time, the value of his Roth jumped from $1,664 to $3.8 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in 2002, eBay purchased PayPal. The same year, Thiel sold his shares, still inside the Roth, and his financial assistant later told New Zealand officials. The tax-free proceeds poured into his account. By the end of 2002, that Roth, again, an original $1,700, was worth $28.5 million. So we've now gone, and for the record, if you look up this ProPublica article and want to read it in full, which I recommend that you do, it has like a kind of a timeline going along the left side of the page, and just showing as you scroll down how much this is increasing and rolling over. I should use this opportunity, and I'm going to read from this in a second, to mention that one of the subjects of discussion on this show, Palantir, which is like a data. Let's just call it a data company. I don't want to oversimplify it, but a data company that has been contracted with ICE. It says here, Thiel used his Roth to buy shares.
That's just good libertarian shit right there. Just government
exactly.
contracts. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, helping the CIA and Homeland Security.
Literally.
That's what good libertarians do.
It says, for instance, Thiel and colleagues in 2003 founded Palantir, a data analytics company, helped by an early investment from a CIA-backed venture fund.
Mm-hmm.
The company was named after the seeing stones made by elves in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, used to detect danger near and far.
Used explicitly in the text as the weapon of Sauron, who's the evil. He's the great evil in he's the big bad in the story.
Fucked.
Yeah.
It says Thiel used his Roth to buy shares of Palantir when it was still a private company, years before it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Over the years, Palantir has won federal contracts from the military to hunt terrorists, from the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to find undocumented immigrants. Even the IRS has a $99 million contract with Palantir to comb through data to identify tax cheats. the monster's in the house, man. Like how, like it's almost too fucking on the nose to even
he hates big government.
I have to mention this too because again, this is and so now at this point we're now in 2008 and his Roth IRA is worth $860 million from an initial $1,700. I can't fucking stress that enough. I'll just read through this quickly. Then in 2004, Thiel met Mark Zuckerberg, a Harvard undergraduate who had come to Silicon Valley for the summer to work on growing the company that would become Facebook. Thiel invested $500,000, Facebook's first large outside infusion of cash. Those Facebook shares ended up where else? In Thiel's Roth IRA. An attorney for Facebook said, blah, blah, blah. That ensured that Thiel wouldn't owe taxes on his early investment into the company. As Thiel's Roth and fortune ballooned, he scolded Americans for their financial imprudence. In a 2006 Forbes column headlined, "Warning, save, save, save." Thiel lamented the low household savings in the United States and called for most Americans to live within their means. "Forego the new kitchen in Sundeck," he wrote. "Shoot to put away 15% of the paycheck. Live modestly and saving well is better than dying broke." Can you, like, if, again, like these
Living
people...
modestly.
Fucking... "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free."
He's literally just trying to make the One Ring. I mean, we'll get into later, like, it's really weird. Like, you know, whatever, longevity potions and shit that he's trying to do. But
Exactly.
he's just Sauron, you know? Like,
Yes.
He read that character in the book and was like, that's me. That's who I'm going to be.
So, in interest of time, I don't want to. In interest of time, I want to just kind of move on from this because you know we're running through it. But I want to just scroll down, go through another 15 years or so, and come to the present day, in which Peter Thiel's Roth IRA right now is worth over $5 billion from the initial $1,700. Now, we, of course, like, are reading this and are, like, fucking slapping ourselves over the face to come to because it's just, like, so fucking sick. And this should have never been able to be exploited in this way. And it's so specific a confluence of factors that allowed for this guy to become unspendably wealthy that it's like it would never be able to be emulated again. And of course, we understand this as like, you know, a fucking ill of our political economy and capitalism and stuff like that. And of course, like the fucking, you know, the tulip bulb panic and shit like that was the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s that did come to a crash. And yet,
I like that tulip reference.
You like that? That was for you.
Fan of that.
That was for you, man.
Big fan of that one.
But unfortunately, if you go to YouTube and you just start to like look up this shit, it has sprung countless success win fucking things being like, to us, it's like Peter Thiel took $1,700 and turned it into $5 billion tax-free. And these success win pricks on YouTube are like, Peter Thiel took $1,700 and turned it into $5 billion tax-free. I'm literally looking at one right now, a guy called The Beat of Business. And this is like the first hit that came up when I was looking about like, you know, Peter Thiel Roth IRA. And it says, it's in all caps on YouTube. It's got 600 views. And it came out a day after the ProPublica thing came out. Fuck me. Jesus, like, and he's this guy must have like seen the ProPublica thing come out, and he was like, "This is great. Let's turn this into something." It says the Peter Thiel Roth IRA strategy: how he turned $2,000 into $5 billion using a tax-free Roth IRA. Don't worry, you can do this too. It literally says that. Jesus Christ. So I want to leave it here, and I'd like to move on to some of the other stuff, but I need to, for no other reason than perhaps I need to take a breather. But the point is, he used an unbelievable confluence of luck, right place at the right time, and frankly, a fucking illegal tax haven to balloon all this money.
It's a scheme.
It's a scheme, and he needs wait only like another 6 years for him to become 60 years old. And he'll be able to take all of it tax-free. It should be a windfall. I mean, it should be taxed. I'm trying to see if it has like, you know, an estimated tax of what it would be had it not been. But I mean, you know, think for us, you know, in our income tax brackets, it's what, like 30% or something like that?
No.
You know, so, you know, even if that were true for on $5 billion, what is that fucking, you know, $1.5 billion in tax revenue that should be going to the United States to fund social programs, ideally, and shit like that. It's very fucking upsetting. So I'm going to breathe now, and let me turn it over to, who are we now? Where are we going now?
Yeah, I think this
Shane.
might be a good time to bring up the Gawker stuff, just because chronologically that's where some of the slots in. I think like the interesting case study of like the lawsuit, and everything that ended up bankrupting Gawker. I mean, it's definitely something you have to talk about in relationship to Thiel, just because it's so weird, and there's so many bizarre and like tawdry details to it, right? And you keep like unfurling new things from it. But at the same time, I, in researching and reading a couple of articles about it, I also watched the Netflix documentary Nobody Speak: Trials of the Free Press, directed by Brian Knappenberger, that came out in like 2017. Did you guys see that?
No.
I never saw it. No.
It's not very good. It provides a lot of information and a lot of like interesting like courtroom footage and stuff from the various trials. But it does end up getting into this like weird sanctimonious place of like, it came out like right in the first year of the Trump presidency. There's a lot of connections there, and while those connections exist, I think the other thing to mention is like going through this. Like, Thiel is obviously like a bad guy here, but like Gawker also is kind of a bad guy. Like, I don't know. I mean, again, I think it's an interesting case study, and there's like larger structural things to be grafted from this. But in going through this, at least from my perspective, this is not like a David versus Goliath situation, right? This is like, like two very bad actors like ending up in this thing. So anyway, I just to give some context here. So Gawker was started in 2003 by this guy Nick Denton and this woman Elizabeth Spears. And, I guess depending on your age group, you probably, if you're old enough, you knew what Gawker was. It's now actually just come back, and I'll get to that at the very end. But it was basically like an online tabloid magazine that positioned itself as like, almost like a TMZ-esque thing, but with like a really hard edge, right? It was like no fucks given. But it was, like very like celebrity scandal focused stuff. And so, they would post all these different kinds of weird, again, very like tabloidy type stories. Some of them they would break. In the documentary, there's a lot of stuff, interviews with Denton and then other people there would like talk about like, they had this commitment to be, to saying the things that the real press didn't want to hear, that the mainstream press wasn't ready for. And most of it was like, like, so-and-so didn't look great on the red carpet. Like that kind of shit. But anyway, they did all this sort of sex scandal kind of stuff.
Right.
Which is what will eventually play into its downfall. But in 2007, a post goes up on Gawker, and the title of this little blog post is "Peter Thiel is totally gay, people." It's written by this guy, Owen Thomas, and this piece, it's not very long. It's only like a few hundred words. I knew of this, but I never looked at it until doing this episode. I'm not going to read from it because it's like very boring and it doesn't really do anything. But what it did was it outed Peter Thiel as gay.
Right.
So this was in 2007. So sort of at the height of Dwight, what you were just laying out, now he's made his big money, windfall of cash with PayPal, and then, has the investment in Facebook. This is when he's really coming up. He's becoming this like big figure in the VC capital world of fucking Silicon Valley, and putting his hand in all these different pies and starting up all these companies and stuff. There's a lot of different contentions about this. The guy who wrote the post originally, Owen Thomas, made these claims that like a lot of people knew that Peter Thiel was gay, so he didn't really feel like he was outing him through this. But I guess Peter Thiel had never himself felt like, he had made that like super, prominent. And again, this is one of those things where it's like, this is a discretionary thing where it's like, it is kind of fucked up, right? To take that, thing and then claim it as a journalistic thing. It's sort of weirdly tabloidy, it's invasive and all that kind of stuff. So that's like a starting point. So keep that in mind. But where we really need to start then is a a year before this, something else is going on in a different area of weird celebrity news. In the world of wrestling, the figure of Hulk Hogan. So in 2006, Hulk Hogan is going through a really rough divorce. His real name, by the way, is Terry Gene Bollea, which, you know, I don't care about wrestling very much, so I just always assumed his name was Hogan, I guess. But obviously, it's like a stage name. That's a whole performance. I'm just gonna keep calling him Hulk Hogan because it's easier to remember. So anyway, by his own accounting, right, Hulk Hogan was going through this like rough divorce at the time. Funnily enough, he was like filming a reality TV show at the same time that his like marriage was falling apart.
That.
So it was all like kind of, you know, out in the air or whatever. And he's going through a really depressive phase. And at one of his lifelong best friends, the radio host, Todd Allen Clem, comes in and is like, boy, have I got the solution for you. And Todd Allen Clem is better known by his radio name, Bubba the Love Sponge.
Mm-hmm. God.
And so, Bubba the Love Sponge goes to Hulk Hogan and is like, look, you're depressed about going through a divorce. Why don't you come over to my house and have sex with my wife? That'll make you feel better. And I guess, you know, that was, they were swingers or whatever, you know, that was their kind of sexual relationship. It was something very normal for them to do. And so Hulk Hogan comes over and he has sex with Clem's wife. And apparently, like, Hogan was like, you better not film this. And Bubba the Love Sponge was like, don't worry, I'm not going to film it. But he did film it. And so he had tapes. And so then there are rumors for many years about these like tapes maybe existing, like, oh, is there a Hulk Hogan sex tape? This is, you know, at that time in the late 2000s, early 2010s, right, there was like all of these different sex tapes were coming out. It was almost like it had its own cultural moment, right? Like the celebrity sex tape was this sort of like scandalous thing. You had a number of celebrities like releasing their own and that kind of thing. And so, you know, in the circulation of rumors, finally in 2012, somebody sends a 30-minute video of this sexual encounter to AJ Delirio, who's like one of the editors at Gawker. And Delirio cuts like a super cut of 2 minutes of the video and he posts it on Gawker, and then that has its own little like meme moment, right? It's like everywhere on the internet, right? They're talking about a late night TV shows. Oh my god, there's a Hulk Hogan sex tape. Hulk Hogan sex tape. Hulk Hogan himself, he goes on like Howard Stern and he talks about it, you know, kind of makes the rounds. And at some point, Hogan is like, you know what, I want this taken down. So he starts legal action. And there's a long, complicated kind of list of like all the different ways that it goes through. They tried in a series of different courts. They tried different, Hogan and his legal team, they try a bunch of different angles of trying to get it removed. I think at one point it's like a copyright claim. And then they shifted it around and, sorry, I got distracted by the minion picture that was just posted to the Discord. Right. Okay. So in 2014 is when it really starts to kind of kick off, and it goes into 2015, and it finally ends up going to trial in state court in Florida in early 2016. So the trial goes on for 2 weeks, and again, it's a major scandal in its own right. Like I mentioned, the one thing that's really valuable to watch in that documentary is it shows like clips from the trial, and there's all these weird things of like Hogan talking about, you know, Hulk Hogan is a personality, and he starts talking about himself in third person. And there's all these surreal moments where he's talking about, like, you know, Hulk Hogan's penis is 10 inches long, but mine isn't. Very weird kind of details cropping up. In fact, another weird detail that that the documentary pointed out is that the judge presiding over the case in Florida was this woman, Pamela Campbell. And so her claim to fame started back in 2005, and she was the defense lawyer for the family of Terry Schiavo.
Oh my god!
Who didn't want her taken off the feeding tubes, right? That was a whole big kind of culture war scandal for a little period in the Bush years. And because she like so ardently defended that case, Governor Jeb Bush made her a judge. So
fucking love
little fun connections to all these different people. But in any case, as this trial's going on, right, there are all these rumors start to circulate, like why is this trial going on so long? Where's the money coming from, right? Like, the legal team for Hulk Hogan has like a dozen fucking lawyers, and they're all put up in these really nice hotels, and so it's like a question of like, where is the backing for all this coming from? And eventually, it leaks that it's Peter Thiel behind it, and then the next day, he comes right out, he's like, yeah. While the trial's going on, he's like, yep, that's me. I'm the one behind this. And so,
Jesus Christ.
To get into some of those details, I'll read from this New York Times piece from May 25th, 2016, by Andrew Ross Sorkin, called Peter Thiel, Tech Billionaire, Reveals Secret War with Gawker. So I'll just kind of jump around the article here to get the relevant bits out. So this is Thiel talking in the article. Quote, "It's less about revenge and more about specific deterrence," he said on Wednesday in his first interview since his identity was revealed. "I saw Gawker pioneer a unique and incredibly damaging way of getting attention by bullying people even when there was no connection with the public interest." Mr. Thiel said that Gawker published articles that were, quote, "very painful and paralyzing for people who were targeted." He said, "I thought it was worth fighting back." Mr. Thiel added, "I can defend myself. Most of the people they attack are not people in my category. They usually attack less prominent, far less wealthy people that simply can't defend themselves." He said that even somebody like Terry Bollea, who's Hulk Hogan, who is a millionaire and famous and a successful person, didn't quite have the resources to do this alone. Mr. Thiel said that he had decided several years ago to set his plan in motion. "I didn't really want to do anything," he said. "I thought it would do more harm to me than good. One of my friends convinced me that if I didn't do something, nobody would." Now we're going to come back to the detail of who this friend might be later, but continuing with the article. Mr. Thiel has donated money to the Committee to Protect Journalists and has often talked about protecting freedom of speech. He said he did not believe his actions were contradictory. Quote, "I refuse to believe that journalism means massive privacy violations," he said. "I think much more highly of journalists than that. It's precisely because I respect journalists that I do not believe they are endangered by fighting back against Gawker." He continued, "It's not like it's some sort of speaking truth to power or something going on here. The way I've thought about this is that Gawker has been a singularly terrible bully. In a way, if I didn't think Gawker was unique, I wouldn't have done any of this. If the entire media was more or less like this would be like trying to boil the ocean." Mr. Thiel said he had not targeted any other media companies. But the revelation this week that Mr. Thiel was covertly backing Mr. Bollea's case, as well as others, has raised a series of new questions about the First Amendment, as well as about the role of big money in the court system, specifically the emerging field of litigation finance, in which third parties like hedge funds and investment firms pay for other people's lawsuits.
That's crazy.
Roy D. Simon, a professor emeritus of legal ethics at Hofstra University School of Law, suggested that the practice has helped, quote, "level the playing field" by providing resources for people to mount cases against big institutions that would be impossible otherwise. But he said there was a risk when a lawsuit was funded by a single person with a potential agenda. "I am troubled by Thiel," Professor Simon said. "I guess that one guy is much more likely to have an agenda driven by revenge or personal dislike or wanting to prove a point." Gets in, some other legal arguments here. Here we go. This is now a statement from that guy Denton, who I mentioned, and you can hear again this sort of weird sanctimonious, like trying to present themselves as like we're the bastions of the free press. But in a statement, Nick Denton, the founder of Gawker Media, who is also personally named in the Hogan suit, said, quote, "Just because Peter Thiel is a Silicon Valley billionaire, his opinion does not trump our millions of readers who know us for routinely driving big news stories, including Hillary Clinton's secret email account, Bill Cosby's history with women, the mayor of Toronto as a crack smoker, Tom Cruise's role within Scientology, the NFL cover-up of domestic abuse by players, and just this month, the hidden power of Facebook to determine the news you see." End quote.
Wow.
And then just to get some more details here and to wrap up, the idea, the thing that is revealed is that Thiel basically put $10 million up to cover all of the legal fees to pursue that, which is like a huge chunk of change,
so
right?
much money.
And he just gave that like straight up to basically provide the resources for this legal team to like churn through that. And also part of the idea here, right, is like the reason why you do this, even if the suit isn't necessarily successful, right, you can, if you have more money than the other party, you can force them to burn through an equal amount of money in legal fees, which is, again, part of the point, right? The goal here is to just destroy Gawker, which ultimately is what happens. Mr. Thiel said he considered his financial backing of the cases against Gawker to be, quote, one of my greater philanthropic things that I've done. I think of it in those terms. He refused to divulge exactly what other cases he has funded, but said, quote, it's safe to say this is not the only one. Skipping then to the very end, Mr. Thiel said, I figured it would eventually come out, adding that he was happy his role might spur a conversation about it being, quote, extremely hard for the most common victims to get justice. He added, quote, it's not for me to decide what happens to Gawker. If America rallies around Gawker and decides we want more people to be outed and more sex tapes to be posted without consent, then they will find a way to save Gawker, and I can't stop it. So, again, he kind of is in this shadowy position. He put this money up, and then when it comes out, he sort of owns it, and he makes this whole point about, Gawker is a particularly bad actor, and I'm helping the little guy, in this case, Hulk Hogan, and he sort of claims like, oh, it's not really about this personal vendetta that I have against Gawker for having outed me a while back. And then some further details come in this other piece. So this is a piece, I found this from The Atlantic from 2018. It's a piece by Derek Thompson called The Most Expensive Comment in Internet History. And what this really is, this is an interview with this other guy, Ryan Holiday, who wrote a book about the Gawker case. And I should say that Ryan Holiday, I looked into him a little bit because I was curious to see if the book, he seems like a particularly shady, everybody involved in this from every angle is just shady and untrustworthy. He's sort of like a marketing self-help guru type guy. And he writes this thing that is, ultimately critical of Thiel. And what is funny, Dwight, when you were talking about all of those success win type guys on YouTube who bolster the idea of entrepreneurship or whatever. Thiel was in this book. He had a chapter or something in this book. Called Tools of Titans, The Tactics, Routines, and Habits of Billionaires, Icons, and World-Class Performers by this guy, Tim Ferriss.
God.
And it's split into 3 sections.
We could do a whole fucking thing on Tim Ferriss' success win shit.
Yeah, but the 3 sections are Part 1, Healthy, Part 2, Wealthy, and Part 3, Wise. And it's just interviews with top performers in their field or whatever. And so Peter Thiel has a chapter in the book. So does Ryan Holiday, the guy who then wrote the book against Thiel.
Incredible.
Other luminaries included in this book are Stanley McChrystal, Glenn Beck. He's in The Wise. Jack Dorsey, also in The Wise. There were some other. Arnold Schwarzenegger is in The Wealthy. A couple of other fun people, and then a bunch of just random celebrities and stuff. There was one more. Oh, Scott Adams. That was the other one. The guy who did the Dilbert thing. So these are all grifters operating more or less the same spaces. But nonetheless, this guy Ryan Holiday wrote this book in 2018, in which he claimed to reveal some new information. And so I'll read a little bit from the interview with him, so that kind of fills in the backstory of what Thiel's motivations and plans were in kind of moving into this lawsuit. So reading from this interview. So this is Thompson asking, I was really struck by your reporting that Thiel went around calling Gawker the MBTO, which stood for Manhattan-based terrorist organization.
Oh my God.
Why did he feel terrorized? Holiday. I think there is an element of unpredictability to it. Most of the media plays by certain rules, but Gawker wrote its own rules, and that scared certain powerful people. Outing was more or less off limits for most news outlets. So I think what kept Thiel and people like him up at night was, if they can out me, then what's next? Will they publish a harmful rumor, even a false rumor? Thompson. Thiel ponders revenge for years. Then, as you report, in April 2011, he is in Berlin and he takes a dinner meeting with a then 26-year-old Thiel devotee who you call Mr. A. This young man essentially tells Thiel, I know you're obsessed with Gawker, and I have an idea to destroy them. He says Thiel should create a shell company to fund investigators and lawyers to find causes of action against Gawker and ultimately sue it into oblivion. He estimates that the plan will take up to 5 years and up to $10 million in funding, which is prophetic. What struck you the most about Mr. A's story? Holiday. I was shocked by the very existence of Mr. A, this mysterious operative who put the plan in motion. Not only does nobody but me or the conspirators know his real name, but also nobody even realized that he exists. They don't realize there was another senior-level person involved in the plot against Gawker. That's fascinating for a story that has been reported so extensively for so many years. I was also shocked that multiple people who knew Mr. A's identity referred to him as a, quote, professional son, as Lyndon B. Johnson was sometimes called, for his ability to identify father figures in his life that would help his career. His secret strength was to understand what powerful people wanted to see in a protege or lieutenant and to make himself into that person. Thiel was speaking about Gawker. He despaired that he couldn't take on the media publisher, and Mr. A said, "Peter, if everyone thought that way, what would the world look like?" Which is almost the same kind of quote that Thiel then brought up, right? Like, this friend gave me this idea, right? If I don't do anything. I'm not sure there's a more perfectly tailored line for a person like Thiel at that point in his life to fund a project like this. At the time, Peter had figured out all the things that wouldn't work, but he recognized the potential in Mr. A's plan the way a venture capitalist recognizes a great idea. Here, he thought, I have the right person behind the right idea, and I'm going to support it. So, basically, what we can kind of glean from this, right, is that, you know, there's this thing that happens in 2007, which again I would say is like fucked up, right? Gawker outs him,
definitely,
and then he simmers with like waiting to hatch a revenge plot, and then like along comes like another like supplicant like guy who like pitches taking down Gawker as if it's like a fucking new app. Right? And Thiel, that once it's put into those terms, Thiel as a venture capitalist is like, oh, I get it. I see what we could do here. Now, again, there's a bunch of weird other sort of tawdry details that come out in the trial itself that I won't get into super much. I'm sure if you were around 5 years ago, right, like you probably were privy to what was going on, although it was kind of overshadowed by the other big news scandal event that was happening at the time, which was the Trump campaign, which we'll probably talk to in a little bit, but the only thing I think that is really worth mentioning is that one of the potential motivations for Hulk Hogan himself was that apparently there was like other material on another tape that revealed that in this sexual encounter he like said a bunch of like racial slurs, specifically like the N-word, and he like a lot. And again, Hulk Hogan is white. Bubba the Love Sponge's wife was white. So I can only imagine how that played into whatever the sexual encounter was, and also like homophobic slurs allegedly. And so basically the idea was that was most likely part of Hogan's motivation to pursue this, right? More so than actually feeling maybe like personally hurt by the exposure, but like worried that like if that gets out, he would be like canceled. Incidentally, as a result of like doing the fucking trial, that did leak, and he was fired from like the WWE, and all of his like shit was scrubbed from there. But he did eventually win the lawsuit. There's another detail, and this is an important one, which is at one point they dropped one of the charges in the suit. And specifically, the reason why they dropped that charge, even though that would mean that they could win less money, it would mean that there would be no insurance coverage. And so the actual people who owned Gawker and ran it would be personally liable for the lawsuit money. So it was a specific legal tactic. Obviously, the goal here was not just to get the most money possible; it was to destroy Gawker, which worked. So inevitably, when the lawsuit is finished, it ends up being $140 million. And that includes levered against Gawker, but also like a number of the principals involved, including like the editor, and like $100,000, like that he was liable for. Nick Denton ended up with like several $1 million that he was personally liable for. The money didn't exist, and so a few weeks after the lawsuit came through, Gawker filed for bankruptcy, and then Denton ended up filing personally for bankruptcy. So it succeeded. It bankrupted the company. It destroyed the publication.
What a fucking mess.
And so, again, in terms of like lessons that you can take from this, right? Like, what's the point of all this story besides it was sort of weird and involved all these bizarre kind of media figures, and then Peter Thiel had a hand in it. The somewhat sanctimonious view, which is like the one that documentary takes, and a lot of people have written about, but I do think has a real value. It just depends on how you frame it, right? Is that the problem with this case is not the fact that like Gawker sucks, right? So like, haha, like, they're bankrupt, they're out. The point is that Thiel, who's now just at this point in his life, just like has enough money to do whatever he wants idly, can just independently decide like, oh, I want to destroy that newspaper. Now, again, calling Gawker a newspaper, whatever, that's where you get into the kind of moral weeds of this. It's like, Gawker themselves, again, Denton, other people involved claim that they were like, very serious journalists and like, we are the fourth estate. And that's how the documentary ends. It's like this rising, like triumphant music. And it's like, feels really weird. But it is a curious thing that's simultaneous to this, right? Like, Trump is coming up. Thiel ends up being a big supporter and donor to Trump. And one of Trump's main things is to do the same exact tactic of like just constantly suing everybody with the intent to drain people. And one of the things he brought up all the time is like the libel laws. We got to open up the libel laws. Right. And the idea here being that if you do that, that does open the floodgates. Like, I mean, Thiel, this case, even though it's weird and sordid and kind of goofy and funny, it does set a precedent that this can be done. If you're like a rich guy, whatever your motivations or intentions are, right? You're looking at this and you're like, oh, I could just crush a newspaper if I wanted to. Like that's the fucking template to do that.
Yes.
And there's some allegations made in the documentary. Again, I think it's like, but like, it wasn't just the fact that they had outed Thiel way back in 2007, but Gawker had also published a number of like stories critical of various projects of his, including one of his hedge fund products that had lost like 90% of its value over a certain period of time. And so it's like, maybe that's part of the motivation, right? Like it's not just this personal thing that I think we could all kind of agree is sort of justifiable. But the other element too of it is like, obviously I think Thiel has a point and a right to like not have his privacy violated like that, right? Like we all do. But simultaneous to him making that claim, he also is doing Palantir, which is like invading everybody's fucking privacy, yes. Right? It's, it's that classic libertarian thing of like, whatever's happening to me, like how dare you invade my personal privacy? However, I do want to create, a golden orb from Lord of the Rings that can like stare into the soul of all other human beings. And as for this, this kind of the framing that Thiel put up as like, I want to support real journalism. He's given money to different places, but he calls this his like biggest philanthropic move too, which I think is a great shitty line.
Unreal.
Prior to all of this going down in 2009, I'm not going to read this whole article because this is coming up on time and this is a whole other thing we could get into. But in 2009, he gave a substantial amount of money. I think it started at 10 grand to little known guy at the time, James O'Keefe,
Yes.
who was starting his stings. I don't know, Chris, if maybe you're going to talk about that at all, but and I mean, we know him now as the Project Veritas guy who's, like doing the secret behind the scenes of Antifa and the Democratic Party and all that kind of bullshit.
Noted Jimothy Sparrow Cake hater.
Yeah. But again, like, there's the obvious hypocrisy there, right? If you're going to grandstand about like I'm doing this because like the people have a right to like a good and decent press and not this slanderous content that Gawker's putting up, like fucking James O'Keefe just creates like honeypot stings that most of the time like fail horribly.
Yes.
But it's a totally like bad faith stunt faux journalism thing, right? So for me, the major kind of takeaway here is that again, what this really signals, beyond just being like kind of a funny and weird story, is, we've talked a lot on the show about when you have all of that money, when you have more money than God, like, what do you do? When you can literally just kick back and be like, you know what, I'm good. Like, I can just fucking hang out in a hot tub all day, like do whatever the fuck I want.
Generations of progeny would never need to work again.
Yes. What do you do? And you're like, you know what? Now I can pursue this little vendetta, crush media I don't like, fund other ones I do like, and then maybe also extend some of that money and some of those ideas to the political realm.
Again, for a guy that spent his fucking free time in undergrad to like write these insane, just hate speech, fucking, oh my God. Yeah, you're right. There's no good guys.
No.
Yeah, I mean, again, all bad guys. I mean, this whole idea of the Mr. A character could also be like just fucking made up by this other guy.
This is my publicist, John Barron.
But it's again all these like weird little people, and it also shows like in these circles how ideas come about. It's just like some weird sycophant at a dinner gives you a fucking idea, and then that's what spurns the whole project. That's what, like, the whole goal for Thiel, right? The whole, like, idea of, like, the philosopher king fucking political system is literally just like, I'll just hold court and the best people will come to me and give me ideas. I mean, one of his other long-standing projects is, like, he has, I forget what it's called, but he, like, it's a oh shit, I should have gotten the name for this, but it's like a fund that he's developed where he, like, every year he finds something. It's like 20 students in college, and he gives them $100,000 to drop out of school and to do innovation.
Yes.
he's like, drop out of school, make something with this, right? Like, let me, like, fund your project or whatever. And you can look at it as a sort of whatever anti-scholarship. I don't know, but but again, it's like, I'm going to hand pick. I'm going to choose. I'm the king, and I can look at my subjects and pick out the best ones among them and let them rise. They'll be my Nazgul as I expand my armies in Mordor.
It's fucking stunning. So, Chris, speaking of which, his political ambitions.
No, and I'm glad I'm glad, Shane, you mentioned the like the philosopher king thing that he's into, because the last kind of sort of few things I wanted to get into here, I just kind of wanted to sort of get at a few more threads here about some of his sort of where he is ideologically nowadays, who he is associating with, where he's spending his money and stuff like that. And I just kind of wanted to start by he wrote this article, or this essay rather, it seems like, for the Cato Institute, for their online publication, Cato
Show.
Unbound, friends of the show, back in 2009, and it's called The Education of a Libertarian. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I did just want to kind of pick a few parts from it here. Incredible. And namely these first couple paragraphs here. It says, I remain committed to the faith of my teenage years, to authentic human freedom as a precondition for the highest good. I stand against confiscatory taxes, totalitarian collectives, and the ideology of the inevitability of the death of every individual. For all these reasons, I still call myself libertarian. But now I must confess that over the last 2 decades, I have changed radically on the question of how to achieve these goals. Most importantly, I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. By tracing out the development of my thinking, I hope to frame some of the challenges faced by all classical liberals today. Then he goes on to a little bit of biography about himself, about him at Stanford, about him, his companies, and blah, 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 and stuff like that. And then kind of down at the end of it here, there's one particular passage that I wanted to read from here. It says, the 1920s were the last decade in American history during which one could be genuinely optimistic about politics.
What?
Since 1920, the vast increase in welfare beneficiaries and the extension of the franchise to women, 2 constituencies that are notoriously tough for libertarians, have rendered the notion of capitalist democracy into an oxymoron. In the face of these realities, one would despair if one limited one's horizon to the world of politics. I do not despair because I no longer believe that politics encompasses all possible futures of our world. In our time, the great task for libertarians is to find an escape from politics in all its forms, from the totalitarian and fundamentalist catastrophes to the unthinking demos that guides so-called social democracy. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about how one is going to not escape via politics, but to kind of escape beyond politics. That there are no truly free places left in the world, and that this this mode of escape has to come from some sort of new process that leads to something undiscovered. And this is where this kind of like weird sort of futurist his ideas get into it as well. And he sketches out what he calls the 3 technological frontiers: cyberspace, outer space, and seasteading. Seasteading being obviously settling the oceans. But what this
have you seen the pictures of the seasteading
settling the
projections?
I don't think I have seen the pictures. No.
Oh, hold on. Let me just really quick, not to interrupt. Just the pictures are so fucking funny, man. They show some graphics of it in that documentary. Here's like an artist rendering of like what these like utopian like ocean communes would look like.
This is like Civ 6.
Yeah, or like fucking
idiot.
It looks like Mother Base from Metal Gear Solid 5, or like Big Shell or something. It looks like Sealand, like an expanded Sealand, like a series of oil platforms.
This looks like something where it's like if you see it change in color or shape, you should notify your doctor. What the fuck?
I'm sorry, Chris. Please.
But what he's kind of obviously getting at in this in this essay of his, and what's sort of kind of like guiding his thinking nowadays is this like you were saying, the philosopher king, or like the CEO monarch is kind of the the way they talk about it. And he's a longtime friend of Curtis Yarvin, who's blogged under the name Mencius Moldberg. He's like a neo-reactionary like blogger from the like Bush era, Obama era internet, and really sort of
one
like
of the intellectual forebearers of like the alt-right
exactly.
Yeah.
Developed the ideas that would become known as like the Dark Enlightenment, this like neo-reactionary shit that would become the alt-right. And Thiel's had a long time associated with him. Has funded some of his companies. He's got some like software developing companies and stuff like that. And his whole thing is basically kind of what Thiel is getting at in that piece, is that libertarian's a doomed project without authoritarianism, right? We have to include this as part of it, and this idea of like the CEO king, the CEO monarch. And a lot of these guys, and Thiel was one of them, definitely saw Trump as something that they could hitch their wagon to. That's why so many of these, so much spreading of these sort of ideas once Trump came along. And like in these sort of alt-right circles, which Peter Thiel was very much on the periphery of, when that was all going on, when Trump first got in office. He was like an early supporter of Trump, long before pretty much anybody else in the business world would kind of like come out and support him. And like notably, he was the first one, like after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and like everyone was like sure that Trump was sunk. He had never donated money to him before. He'd been a vocal supporter of him, but like 3 days after that Access Hollywood tape came out, he donated $1.25 million to his campaign and one of his political action committees.
I mean, as like troubling as it is to even like think about doing, for the guy that said, "Hey, remember that hideously misogynistic book that I wrote 20 years ago that doesn't reflect at all who I am?"
Right. Yeah.
No fewer than 24 hours after some other, billionaire prick does, says something insanely misogynistic and barely comprehensible, I'm going to donate to him to show how much that doesn't.
Right, that's an act of contrition.
Say who I am.
Absolutely. And yeah, so at this time when Trump is in office, and a lot of these guys, Bannon obviously is one of them. Bannon and Thiel, again, a very close connection there. They know each other. They've worked together. And for guys like that, specifically who have like the money like Thiel and also Bannon did, or like the influence like Bannon did through Breitbart and stuff like that, this had the opportunity to launder these sort of like neo-reactionary white nationalist ideas into wider conservative circles, and kind of that was their moment to really kind of sort of bring that stuff to the forefront. And Thiel was very much associated with all of these guys, Milo Yiannopoulos and Peter Bremolo, the founder of VDare, whose castle Shane and I were casing in West Virginia. But yeah, I mean, Thiel has met with all these guys. There's all sorts of emails that have been leaked between Brimelow and other people at VDare about meetings with Thiel. These are explicit like Nazis. This is like no beating around the bush. This is like Nazi, unashamed white nationalist stuff. And Thiel was has very much been a part of that. Oh yeah, I'm glad you mentioned you mentioned this funding of James O'Keefe. Another guy, Eric Weinstein, who's the guy who coined the term intellectual dark web. He's a managing director at Thiel Capital. He's an employee of Peter Thiel.
He's also in that book Tools of Titans I mentioned. He's got a chapter in part 3, Wise.
Yeah. So there you go. So I mean, Thiel again is connected through Weinstein to Jordan Peterson and all those kind of intellectual dark web type people. The thing is, like, we can kind of see see him on the periphery of this sort of stuff. I'm sure he's giving a ton of money to this type of stuff. We don't have any sort of evidence of that, but just if we can kind of see what is public and where he's spending a lot of money, and he does spend a lot of money on political campaigns and to like push right-wing policy proposals. Specifically, he has a tendency to donate to anti-immigration hardliners in particular. That seems to be where a lot of his money is going. Trump, in particular, Chris Kobach, he gave him $2 million for his Senate campaign. He was a major contributor to Ron Paul's presidential campaigns. Rand Paul's
the love revolution.
Oh my God,
Rand Paul's Senate campaigns. In 2015 and 2016, he contributed a total of $300,000 to Josh Hawley's campaign for Missouri Attorney General before he was even running for Senate. Josh Hawley, by the way, also went to Stanford and was a writer at the Stanford Review about a decade after Thiel.
But education is what people need to realize that like people have human rights.
There's this fucking basically laundromat for right-wing dark money called Americans for Job Security. It's a very just anodyne,
love it,
ridiculous name for it.
The legitimatejobs.com/incorporated.
Right.
PatriotJobs123.biz.
But yeah, I mean, essentially just a way to basically launder money from rich, wealthy donors to funnel it to political campaigns and keep their list of donors secret. They really kind of took off in like 2010 after Citizens United, like just in time to hop onto the Tea Party bandwagon. They poured $9 million into negative ads, supporting Republican congressional candidates, and they spent an additional $15 million in 2012 trying to defeat Obama. Like all told, they spent like $60 million. And the interesting thing about this place, they no longer exist because they were the subject of numerous complaints to the Federal Elections Commission. And after this like rather lengthy legal battle, they did lose their nonprofit status, and they were forced to register as a political action committee and disclose their list of donors, among whom Peter Thiel was one of the largest. Also, some other friends of the show here, Richard and Helen DeVos, $2 million they gave to this nonprofit. And also Sheldon Adelson, friend of the show, Sheldon Adelson, gave $500,000 also to the same group. Like I said, he gave the original $1.25 million to the Trump campaign after the Access Hollywood tape leaked. Gave, I believe, at least another $1 million to $1.5 million after that.
Pocket change.
He gave. Here's a good one. He's given. This was this year. He's given $10 million to a group funding J.D. Vance's Ohio Senate campaign.
Oh my God.
J.D. Vance of Hillbilly Elegy, who also worked for Thiel at Mithril Capital, also named for Lord of the Rings shit. He donated $10 million to this guy named Blake Masters, who's currently running for Arizona Senate for the 2022 election. Masters is a former student of Thiel's at Stanford Law School. Thiel taught some courses at Stanford at their law school, I believe in the early 2000s. This guy Masters is also, he co-wrote a book with, he co-wrote one of Thiel's books, which is called 0 to 1 Notes on Startup, or How to Build a Future, which is like Thiel's book on how to become a successful entrepreneur, which I guess, I mean, step one is borrowing $1 million of your money your dad made like during his time in a mining company in apartheid South Africa. I guess that's step one of becoming an entrepreneur.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it, I guess. That's all I got.
Okay.
He's bad. He's bad, folks. He's very bad. That's just like some of the notes I took here. There's a ton of stuff like this. There's a ton of very lengthy articles. BuzzFeed in particular wrote one. This was published last year called Peter Thiel Met with the Racist Fringe as he went all in on Trump. This is all about his association with some alt-right figures like Milo and Peter Brimelow. And I think that it's fitting, and it's interesting. I didn't know that, because I don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, but I never knew that, like what you said, Shane, that like the Palantir thing was like, who's the guy, who's the evil guy? I don't know. What's his name?
Sauron, yeah.
So I think that's like, he has to even know that intellectually. Like, I think it's like a nod that he knows he's evil. Like he knows it, and he's fully embracing it, like more and more with this, like with his like anti-democratic, like very outwardly proudly racist, proudly authoritarian ideas that he has, and he's got a lot of money, and he's putting it towards people who share these kind of ideas.
That's like the thing that I keep coming back to in my mind, and I think you just said it now, Chris, and Shane, I think you said it earlier, which is like evil. Because like if any of us, had a win, turned 1,700 bones into $5 billion or whatever. If I turn, I mean, obviously there's much smaller sums of money that we would find agreeable to live with. Like,
I'll take the 1,700.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, we would go enjoy ourselves or follow some intellectual, but go fucking sit outside and stare at a little fire and like drink hot cocoa or wine or something like that, or I
would probably buy a prop Palantir from the Lord of the Rings films. I think that'd be cool to have.
But rather, he has spent like a longitudinal amount of his life like devoted to evil, like devoted to this like ideological bend to make sure that people do not have universal dignity. That's some terrifying shit. Like, that is like, your heart is fucking putrid.
I mean, and I think one of the things you brought up, Chris, as well, one of the things he had wrote, or one of his speeches, where he's talking about like the ideology of the inevitability of the death of every individual. I mean, like, the thing that we didn't even really touch on is all of his like weird biotech shit that he's got his hands in.
Oh,
I mean, he's interested.
Let's do a fucking speed round of all the insane shit.
He's noted a number of times. I don't think it's ever confirmed that he himself has gotten the treatment, but he's publicly said, "I'm very interested in parabiosis," which is the process of taking the blood of young people and injecting it into your body to see if it like extends your life. I mean, I think he's like signed up to be like fucking, cryogenically frozen. Like he's put all this money into all of these weird, like longevity potion fucking things, so he could live to be 1,000 years old, like fucking Gandalf or like Sauron. Like, and two, the fact that he moved to New Zealand. I mean, obviously there's like the tax reason for that, but I would be so surprised, because they retained, in New Zealand, they retained many of the sets that they built for Lord of the Rings, like the big like structures and cities and things.
I didn't even think about that.
I would be fucking surprised if he hasn't like bought the Tower of Barad-dûr or whatever equivalent they have, and he just like sits in there like adorning himself in orcish armor, like injecting the blood of hobbits into his body repeatedly to just stay, pure and alive. He's a real sick fucking freak.
Yeah, he's actually doing the like Gilded Age, like Battle Creek Sanitarium shit, where he's like,
yes,
wheel me into the solarium I needed.
Yeah,
I enjoy it. Oh my god, I can't even do the voice. I enjoy the New Zealand air. It's good for my blood.
He's gonna be like in the Rise of Skywalker when you see like Palpatine is connected to the giant like robot arm, and he's all like withered and zombied. He's gonna be like, I am still alive. I'm every voice you have ever heard inside your head. The Dark Enlightenment. He's a sicko. He's a real fucking sicko, Dan.
Yes, I think I threw out my back doing this. It was fucked before, man. I really hurt it. I had a muscle spasm. Fuck. All right, we need to stop here.
Yeah.
We need to stop here. We made our point.
Here's my punishment.
All right, go ahead.
And I'm sure this is going to go over both of your heads, but maybe there's
we are
small slice of listeners who's going to get this. I imagine in my mind, like Peter Thiel, he's on like a crowded, trafficked bridge, right? And something happens, like an accident behind him. He's in a car, and he gets out of the car, and he turns, and then he sees just 4 fucking giant mechanical octopus arms clambering onto the freeway, and then up comes Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, and he just looks at him, and he goes, "Hello, Peter." And then we cut to black, cue the Spider-Man theme, and then, Dr. Octopus... I mean, cut that part. But he just fucking eviscerates him with that. But that would be my ideal ending. I mean, if any of this shit works, I'm assuming there's no science behind parabiosis in reality. It's just like leeching yourself
there is,
or
then
something.
We should maybe find out where he stores the bags of like young people blood and like replace them with like Sheldon Adelson blood or something.
To advance his aging.
Yeah. If that's the way it works, I mean, I'm assuming.
It's just a bunch of old freaks exchanging the same blood to each other. It's just circulating.
Who wants to come to a blood party? Goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
Stay cool. Stay cool. Stay cool.
I see you. That's what happens when Pippin grabs the Palantir. The Eye of Sauron looks into like his soul, and it goes, "I see you." Can we play out with the Mordor themes?
Yes, that's
from
correct.
Lord of the Rings, please.
That's correct.
Oh yeah.